At the end of 2020, Macallan released the Red Collection to great fanfare. But what are the bottles and what makes these bottles so special? We're fortunate enough to have one of these Red Collection bottles with us today, but before we look at the bottle in much more detail, let's look at the information about the collection in general. And starting off with probably the most fundamental question of all, why is it called the Red Collection? Well, if you look at the Macallan's founder, Alexander Reed, and we sort of pretty much find our answer there. The surname Reed derives from, well, to use layman's terms, someone with a red face or ginger hair. And if you look at the Macallan's website, you find much more romantic terminology, such as somebody with sanguine hair or sanguine locks, but either someone who was ginger or had a red face. Now, again, if you go back through Macallan's history or sort of flash forward through Macallan's history, you find red used in quite a lot of instances. So on the handwritten label series, which we did a video about earlier, you can see that these labels are tied around with a red ribbon. And also when you look at the anniversary malt series, a bottle which has quite a few comparisons with this release, that had a big red 25 in the middle of the label too. So Macallan has got a long history and long association with the name Red. Now we know why it's called the Red Collection. Well, what's the purpose behind it? And when I was researching this video, I read quite a lot of the press releases that came out and all the interpretations of the press releases, and this is sort of one of the phrases that kept coming up. It says, the Red Collection features a carefully curated selection of ongoing aged expressions and high-aged guest releases. So first of all, let's look at the age statements that have been released already and were part of the original release, and sort of let's look at them in a bit more detail. So there were 6 bottles that were released of the first trench of bottles for the Red Collection. You had the 40, the 50 and the 60. Now, these were released at £11,300, £37,500 and £49,000 respectively. Now, Macallan's got a long history of 40, 50 and 60-year-old bottlings. There was a 40-year-old for travel retail. There's been several other 40-year-olds in the past. The 50-year-old, of course, you've got the anniversary malt that was released in 1983, and you've also got that in other collections as well. And of course, the 60-year-old, you've got the 1926 60-year-old, which again had labels designed by Peter Blake and Valerio Adami, etc. So they are like the core ranges, they're standard age statements for Macallan's really. But then what made this collection more special is that they released 3 extra releases. They released a 71-year-old at £58,500, a 74-year-old at £61,500 and a 78-year-old at £65,500. And that 78-year-old was the world's oldest single malt whiskey ever to have been released. In terms of pricing, it's interesting to note that the 50-year-old bottle was released at just under £13,000 cheaper than the 50-year-old bottle from the Peter Blake Anecdotes of Ages series. Now, the only differentiation that I can see in terms of these 2 bottlings is that the Peter Blake one had a vintage statement, so it was 1967 50-year-old whiskey, and then the Red Collection, these are non-vintage expressions, so you get an age statement but you don't know what years they've come from. So these could, in theory, be vattings of multiple ages, with the minimum age within that whiskey being the age that's declared. So the 40-year-old might contain 50, 60, 70-year-old whiskey within it, but the youngest whiskey is 40 years of age. So it's it's an easy way to work around for distilleries if you've got lots of these old stocks. And they're all part of a limited edition, but no one really knows how limited the editions are, so it doesn't say how many have been released of each series. The first set of these bottles went under the hammer at Sotheby's, and this was a complete set of 6 bottles, and this sold for just over £750,000 for all 6 bottles. But these bottles were being sold for charity, they were being sold for a food bank in London, and they also had one-off artworks on them designed by, I'm going to destroy this name, I'm very sorry, Javi Aznares. So these had unique illustrated labels, and there were 2 sets done with these special labels. One set was sold via Sotheby's and one set was retained by the Macallan distillery. So we're seeing more and more of Macallan releases and these high age statement releases being sold first at auction, especially through a charity auction, and because they did it with the Peter Blake Anecdotes of Ages as well. And the cynic you know, the generous side of me wants to think, wow, this is really, really benevolent. They're doing some really good work for charity here, which they are doing. It's undeniable. Between the Peter Blake bottle and the Red Collection, that's over £1 million being donated via Sotheby's and Macallan. But then the cynic in me and the person who likes marketing in me thinks, well, bloody hell, this is a really good way to generate interest in these bottles, because at £750,000, that's a heck of a price to pay, but that was a charitable donation from the person who ever bought it. So you can offset that against your taxes and things like that, you see. So there are more factors in play with these charity sales than may first meet the eye. As we've seen, there's been 6 releases: the 40, the 50, the 60, the 71, the 74 and the 78. But we get back to that opening comment that I made from the Macallan press releases, which says, a carefully curated selection of ongoing aged expressions and high-aged guest releases. So I would bet, if I was a betting man, I would bet a lot of money on the fact that there's going to be more Macallan Red Collection bottles in the future. I think the 40, the 50 and the 60 will stay the same, but I think we're going to see other interesting age statements released as part of this series. So let's take a look at the bottles. What are they like and why are they so expensive? Well, as we mentioned earlier, we've got one here with us today. And the first thing to note, they're in these really, really nicely presented oak boxes. This is all being lasered in, so it's fantastic detail. You've got the Easter Elkies house up here. And again, Macallan, as ever, natural colour has to go on the box. It's really important to them that they don't colour their whiskies. It's all natural colour. So fantastic, beautiful oak box, and it's got a magnetic latch here which keeps it closed. And then the interior of the box is quite a work of art in itself as well. So this is a red leather interior. You get a bit of marketing blurb on your little certificate there, and then look at this, you get a lovely little dovetailed stopper there, which is also retained on a magnetic clasp. So that comes out and you can slide the bottle out, and it even comes with its own little coaster. So there's the box. It's a beautiful piece of presentation. So you then get to the bottles themselves, which are relatively ordinary. They feature a very deep step at the bottom of the bottle, which makes them relatively heavy, and they've got a polished base as well. So these are sort of bespoke bottles that Macallan have probably commissioned the moulds for, so they're not off-the-shelf moulds really. The label itself, and again we mentioned the Anniversary Malt series earlier, and this, if you watched our video about the Anniversary Malt series, you'll see that there's so many comparisons between this and the Anniversary Malt series. One, you've got the big red age statement in the background, in the foreground, and in the background you've got lots of little text that no one really bothers to read, but this one's just about marketing speech. It's lovely whiskey. We know you make great whiskey, Macallan, but it's quite a nice way of using typography on a label, and the only graphic element is the little Easter Elkies house on here. So 700ml, this one's bottled at 48.1%. You've got a limited edition number up here, and then you've got the bottled in 2020. Now, why does it say bottled in? You know, okay, that could be generic, but I wonder if they're going to release a 40-year-old in 2021. I just think Macallan are up to something with these red collections. I could be massively wrong, but it's just my hunch. But you've got the comparisons here with the Anniversary malts that went on for sort of 16, 18 years. So I think this red collection is going to be part of the Macallan stable going forward. So they really are beautifully presented bottles. And again, you get this little wooden coaster. So if you want to display it, and we've got a video coming out shortly about how to store your whiskey, and if you want to store your Red Collection bottle outside the box, you can of course put it on this little wooden coaster. The only thing that I would say about the Red Collection presentation is that it feels a bit, it's not cheap, but if you compare it to other Macallan releases like the Six Pillars and Lalique, and you compare it to the Anecdotes of Ages with those sort of unique Peter Blake artworks and things, I can't help but feel a little bit underwhelmed by it really. You know, the 78-year-old, it was the world's oldest whiskey ever released, and yet it comes in exactly the same bottle and box and presentation as the 40-year-old. So bang for buck, the 40-year-old for me is probably the better buy. You know, it's the same presentation, you get the same kudos as part of the series, and I don't know, there's just something that's missing about it really. But when you look at the original retail prices, these weren't expensive bottles in the same way that Lalique was. And again, why is that? Well, maybe they're doing an ongoing series, maybe they're going to be doing more of them. Maybe it's not meant to be like an artisan bottle like the Lalique bottles were. Maybe it's meant to be more of a ultra high-end, ultra high net worth ongoing release of bottles. Now, a lot of these bottles have been appearing at auction, so it's interesting to take a look at some of these prices. But first of all, let's get rid of that coaster and let's get rid of this bottle. I'm a bit nervous about having it up there with me, because the cask is drying out massively in our office, and I think we need to screw these staves in before the whole thing falls apart. So, as we've said, most of these bottles have appeared at auction. They've all been released and all been made release for general sale. And these are sort of like the auction records to date. So that 40-year-old, the auction record price for this is £20,000. The 50-year-old was at £52,000. Now wait for this one, the 60-year-old, £122,000. The 71-year-old, £59,000. There's been no recorded official sales of the 74-year-old, even though one did go into auction. It didn't make its reserve, but I think it was bid to over £50,000 again. And the 78-year-old, the record for that is £92,500. So what is going on? Why is that 60-year-old making nearly double the price of the 78? So you've got the world's oldest whiskey ever released, and it's only worth £92,000 at auction. And you've got the 60-year-old, and that's selling for almost double the price. Well, there's only been one recorded sale of the 60-year-old. Now, the 60-year-old was released in two versions. It was available individually, and it was also available as a guest set of the 40, 50, and the 60. Now, we don't know the release numbers of these bottles, but my speculation is that there's been high numbers of the 40, the 50, the 71, and the 78 release. See, there might be hundreds of these, but there might only be, say, 150 of the 60-year-old and 150 of the 74-year-old, and they've probably not all been released yet. Again, these were released at the end of COVID in 2020, or the end of COVID is the mess that it was in the UK at 2020, and these are probably going to go for sale in travel retail and other ultra-high net worth locations like the Macallan boutiques. So I think there's a certain proportion of these reserved for sale in these boutique shops, which is why we've not seen them come to market. Now, that's had a knock-on effect really, because a lot of people like making collections. We've seen with the folio bottles, people are spending £9,000 for the first folio because they believe there's going to be a series of 24 of them, so they're trying to complete the set. But people soon realise with the Red Collection, if you had the money to build a full set, you still couldn't make it because you couldn't find the 60 and you couldn't find the 74-year-old. So it's quite another fascinating piece of marketing by Macallan, whether that's done intentionally, which I think it must be in some way intentional, to drive the demand and drive the prices and drive the hype for these bottles. So there we have it, it's the Macallan Red Collection, celebrating Macallan's association with the colour red. Originally there's just 6 bottles part of the series, and as I've banged on about so many times, I think there's going to be more releases of part of this series. And are they going to be a good buy? Are they going to be a good investment? Yeah, I think so. I think that 40-year-old at £20,000, if you compare it to the likes of the 40-year-old that was released for travel retail, you find that in retail locations now it's like £40,000 a bottle. So this 40-year-old is relatively affordable. Same with the 50, it's quite an affordable way to buy a 50-year-old, especially when you compare it to like the Anecdotes of Ages Peter Blake bottling. So overall, I really like this series. It's a masterstroke of marketing. There's lots of different facets. You're tying into the old roots with like the aesthetics of the anniversary malts, the red from the Red Ribbon series. There's just so much going on here. And if it does continue and move into a bigger series of bottles like the Fine and Rare series, I think this could be a very high value series in years to come. And if you're looking to buy any bottles from Macallan or sell your bottles from Macallan, head to the Mark Little website. We've got loads of informative guides, and we've got a shop available with lots of bottles available to buy with worldwide shipping available.